As a fearful avoidant, do you ever find yourself oscillating between overgiving and then feeling resentful? Well, if this sounds like you, it may be something really sabotaging your relationships. And one of the biggest roots of this pattern in and of itself is codependency. So, in today's video, I'm going to give you three key takeaways that will help transform the way you see your relationships and the way you see yourself within them so you can create more harmony, more balance, and actually feel seen and heard in your relationships around you. My name is Thais Gibson, and I am the founder of the Personal Development School. I basically create daily videos on here to talk to you a little bit about attachment styles, your subconscious mind, and how to actually recondition our subconscious mind to become more securely attached, and a whole bunch of other tips and tools for transforming relationships. And in today's video, we're going to do a deep dive into codependency, which means you first have to understand what codependency is. Now, one of the biggest myths here, before I even go into this, is that codependency is an anxious attachment thing exclusively, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, fearful avoidants are very frequently codependent, and it's a common dynamic. So, when we look at the typical definition of codependency, it's essentially a pattern of relationship behaviors that create a form of addiction between two people due to subconscious fears and beliefs, both about oneself and the other. And these fears end up blurring the lines between self identity and personal boundaries, which then result in unhealthy exchanges and imbalances in the relationship dynamic. And if we look at fearful avoidance, you will absolutely see this to be the case. Another variation of this, or thinking of it as, is by Dr. Gabor Mate, who talks about addiction. And codependency and addiction actually have a lot of parallels. Dr. Gabor Mate defines addiction as basically any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief and pleasure within, but then suffers the negative consequences and yet still has a difficult time giving up. And you'll actually see this a lot in codependent relationships. You may find yourself overgiving or pouring into people, thinking that you are earning your worth or earning love. And then this may cause you to actually instead feel resentment later. Now, as a fearful avoidant, why does this even happen? What are the roots? Well, the roots usually exist within childhood, or if you grew up in a chaotic environment or dynamic, you may find that you basically got love or connection by overgiving, by trying to support when you saw your family members in chaos or you saw people in need. And maybe only through you supporting other people when they were in need did you feel like you were actually seen and heard, or did you feel like you actually were given some sort of love and attention. And so it's very often that fearful avoidants actually build a huge part of their identity and personality at a subconscious level around thinking, okay, in order to sustain relationships, I have to be pouring into them all the time. I have to be overgiving. And often you may even find yourself blocking receiving from others because it can scare you to receive from others in case you do receive and then people think you're a burden, or then people don't have room or space for you in their life. And again, if you've ever felt like this is a fearful avoidant, it usually represents that at some point in life, you were made to feel like your needs were not getting met unless you did these things, unless you care took for others, or unless you really overgave or did something to really soothe or support somebody else. Some really classic examples you might see is, for example, a parent being an alcoholic, and maybe they're really sort of, um, up in their addiction, but they do see you when you're caretaking them, making sure you help them get into bed, make them some soup, help them nurse a hangover. Or another example could be if you have parents who are arguing all the time, especially in excess, and then you're sort of going back and forth, checking on each of them, making sure they're okay. It is in these types of dynamics that you may feel like, oh, I get seen when I do these things. And don't get me wrong, there's beautiful parts to that, right? You may find that you have a high need for contribution, you may care deeply about others, empathize very deeply with other people. But it becomes problematic when it's at the expense of yourself. Becomes problematic when you don't understand, number one, the difference between compromise versus sacrifice. Sacrificing is you giving when it goes against yourself. It's actually violating your own boundaries to be there. An example of this could be that you had the most exhausting week, your tank is empty, and somebody asks you to come over and support them emotionally for the rest of the evening. And you do it when you know you really don't, you're running on fumes, you don't have much there to give. And that would be, an appropriate time to work on self care, to do what fills your cup rather than to go run on fumes and give to somebody else. But if you see yourself doing that, chances are that's actually coming from a space of codependency. Another root that's really important to recognize in terms of these patterns are these core wounds that I was talking about. If you believe I am unworthy for love as I am, without giving so much all the time, or I'm, not going to be accepted or included if I'm not doing so much for somebody else. Again, these will be patterns that cause you to get trapped in these codependent dynamics. So, how can we actually break them down? And this is sort of point number three that I want you to hear and understand, which is that we break these things down by first getting rid of these ideas about ourselves that we always have to, over compensate essentially for our unworthiness or our lack of being loved or seen. You have to feel like you can overcome those ideas about yourself and recondition them at a subconscious level so that we don't come from a space of fear in terms of how we're operating in relationships. And another really important part of this is to actually practice communicating your boundaries and understanding what they are with other people. And going back to this concept of compromise versus sacrifice, is sacrifice is you're running on fumes and then you show up and you're literally there with nothing to give. A compromise is you considering yourself. Maybe you didn't have a really busy week where you felt overwhelmed. And maybe somebody asks you for emotional support and you're like, you know what? I have some things I really have to get to for myself tonight, but I can definitely spare an hour with them. And so you think about yourself in the process of making the decision. That really goes hand in hand with how to appropriately set boundaries. So if you want to do a deeper dive into like understanding your boundaries, you can check out this video that I'll link down below. But I also have a course you can check out fully for free, just for a limited time, all about boundaries and using boundaries, practicing communicating your boundaries in a healthy way, understanding how to know what they are in real time, um, so that you can stop making decisions from this kind of like compulsive codependent space. So I'll put the link down below fully for free, just for a limited time. And the last thing I just want to say here is when it comes to reconditioning these ideas about ourselves, we actually have to use repetition and emotion because it's what fires and wires new neural pathways to introduce a different way of seeing ourselves. So if you're used to thinking, okay, I'm unworthy, what you want to do is you want to leverage repetition and emotion to see where you are worthy. Why am I worthy of love without having to overcompensate all the time? What characteristics or qualities do I have that make me worthy of love just as I am, as a person, without trying to behave in a way that's overcompensating? Um, you can also look at like, what about me is lovable? Why am I worthy or deserving of love for who I am at my core? And so the more you can sort of introduce ideas there, especially that have imagery in them, repetition, emotion, imagery are like three key ingredients to really reconditioning these ideas. And all those three ingredients exist within memories. So if you can look at different memories you have of how you felt lovable, how you knew you were lovable, not because you were giving to somebody or overcompensating in some way, but because you just got to know somebody as a friend and they connected with you, right? Look at those like raw and real experiences that you had. The more evidence you have there, the more you rinse and repeat these pieces of evidence or these memories, you're actually starting to recondition a new way of seeing yourself and thinking about yourself. And when you pair that with setting healthy boundaries, you're going to see codependent patterns start to transform. And what this will allow you to feel is that you can actually be seen and heard and connected and treated in an equal way in your relationships so that you aren't feeling resentful, you aren't feeling burnt out, and you feel like you can be taken into consideration as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this channel, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and I can't wait to see you in future videos.